Greetings, lovely listeners, and welcome to this instalment of Out of the Darkness. I'm your host, Angela, and as always, I thank you for joining me. In today's edition, we're going to hear some truly terrifying stories about ghosts, poltergeists, and demons. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all our new subscribers and followers. Without you guys, none of this would be possible. If you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel or followed our podcast, remember to do so now. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to hear some creepy tales. A few years ago, I stayed on the Queen Mary for a weekend with my mum, sister and stepdad to celebrate my mum's birthday. We're all somewhat enthused by the paranormal, so we decided to take a ghost tour of the famously haunted ship. Honestly, there were countless bizarre things that happened on that tour, but the scariest part was what happened in a notoriously haunted stateroom. This is a room that had previously been one for guests to stay in, but they were eventually stopped allowing guests to stay there and completely stripped it down because of how many people were reporting terrifying experiences in there. This was in 2017. As of 2018, room B340 is now available to stay in on the Queen Mary once again. Our tour group was led into the room, and the tour guide started talking about the reported experiences in the room, and gave me a name to the reported entity who lived there. I don't remember the name, so for the sake of the story, let's say it was Jim. The tour guide kept saying Jim this and Jim that. Out of nowhere, I started to feel totally enraged. I'm talking violently enraged. I wanted to tackle this person to the ground, beat them senseless, and I'm normally a completely non-violent and passive person. Over and over in my head, unrelenting, all I could think was, my name is not Jim, my name is not Jim. I couldn't stop it. I was so angry I was getting dizzy, I was nauseous, I felt totally overwhelmed, and like I was going to collapse or kill someone. It was one of the worst paranormal experiences of my life. I ended up walking out of that stateroom before the tour group was moving on, and as soon as I did, the feeling released. It was unforgettable. I think whatever lives in that room truly had a hold of me. I've been a paranormal investigator for 11 years and didn't really buy into the whole possession thing completely until I experienced it myself. It's so unbelievable that I never shared it with anyone besides the people who were with me that night. My team and I investigated Moundsville Penitentiary in West Virginia about 5 years ago. About an hour into the investigation, while pretending to be a prison guard and ordering the inmates to lock in, I suddenly felt like I had no control over anything I was doing or saying. I felt complete rage wash over me, and I started yelling at my team. They thought I was just messing with them at first, but soon found out I wasn't when I clenched my fists and told them I would beat the shit out of them. They walked away quickly, and I was standing alone in the corridor when I screamed out "F you" at the top of my lungs. As soon as it had come, it left, and I was, for lack of a better word, back. I looked around and realized I was by myself, and I got terrified. I was trying to process what the hell had happened, and I started crying. A couple of the guys came back and walked me out of the prison yard, where I got myself together. I am a passive and non-violent person, so it was a complete shock to all involved. The rest of the investigation went well, and besides that one incident, it was a great time. Never in my life have I experienced anger and hatred like that. A couple of years ago, I hosted a weekly paranormal investigation at a very old haunted inn. This was for people who wanted to learn how to do a formal paranormal investigation. Our job was to educate them on equipment use, investigation techniques, and show them some of our evidence and finally do the investigation with them. A group we had one weekend was a rock band from upstate New York and a newspaper journalist. They were great. One of the guys, however, said right off the bat that he didn't believe in anything paranormal, and he was only coming because his friends really wanted him to join them. At some point during the investigation, that same guy got up and walked out of the room we were in. One of his friends followed him out to see why he left. About 30 seconds later, his friend asked me to come out into the hallway. When I got out there, I saw the guy who claimed he didn't believe in this stuff to be bawling his eyes out. I asked him what was going on, and he said he didn't know. He said he just felt all of a sudden an overwhelming sadness. He asked what the hell was going on. It had hit him like a ton of bricks. I told him in my opinion he was picking up on the emotion of one of the entities that called this place home. He said that was impossible since ghosts don't exist. At that point, I left him with his friends and carried on the investigation with the others. By the end of the night, he had chilled out and thanked me and my team for the experience. The point I'm trying to make is this kind of thing happens more than you would imagine, and although it's scary, it does intrigue me. Can poltergeists follow people? This is my first time posting. I'm sure I'll be sharing dozens of stories. A lot of them I've never gotten to tell, and I would enjoy sharing them. So I've had strange encounters and experienced paranormal things before I can even remember. I wonder, can things that act as a poltergeist follow an individual? I ask because in almost every house I've lived, I've experienced poltergeist activity. 2 separate homes I've lived in the same town had almost exactly the same activity. Doors opening and closing, lights turning on and off, loud banging, things falling and disappearing. The first house got pretty intense before I left. The kitchen light fixture was torn from the ceiling, a window came out of the frame, and I kept coming home or waking up to all the doors, cabinets and drawers open. I saw an entity in my bedroom. The next house I moved into, the same things happened, and I saw the same energy figure. Things in that house escalated much faster. Lights unscrewing themselves, hearing talking, footsteps running towards you, doors slamming and things getting broken. But since I moved to the other side of the country, everything stopped. Gradually though, our lights have begun flickering when I enter a room. Our doorknobs occasionally jiggle on their own, and we've recently started seeing things move out of our peripheral vision. A month ago I swore I heard my husband open our front door and call out to me. Upon investigation, he was still at work. Our cats have reacted to these incidents and have randomly begun hissing with their tails fluffed up, 3 to 4 times in the last few months. This is very out of character for them as they're super non-aggressive kitties. We've lived here for about a year without a major incident, but things are progressing similarly to the past, and could it be the same thing? My son tells me about a familiar ghost. When my son was younger, we were living in a 2-story townhouse with his brother and father. One day he looked at me and tells me that he sometimes sees an old man in the house wearing jeans and a red plaid shirt. He described him to me. I told him that was really strange because it sounded like his great-grandfather who had passed away before he was born. For most of his life, my grandfather had lived in Tennessee, but then I remember he did live a short time in Sunnyvale, California, in the same town we now lived. I did a bit of research after we moved and found out it was in the same townhouse we were living in where my son saw the old man. Angel of Death, Mothman, or my imagination? I want to begin my story by telling you all first and foremost, I do not believe in the supernatural. I've never seen a ghost, spirit, entity, or malevolent force of nature. I've never encountered a poltergeist, demon, or an angel. I'm not here to state the validity of anyone else's experience, only my own. I do, however, believe in things that are good and things that are evil. Is it supernatural? I'm not sure one way or the other. My story begins when I was 20. I was in college, and like most college students, I was rebellious, wild, and carefree.
I was eager to obtain a part-time job, wanted my own spending money, and coming from a small community with very little businesses, I was pretty much out of luck. My sister, who was 7 years older, newly married with a baby, she worked at our local hospital, the only hospital in our hometown. She was an RN and trying to establish a good foundation of employment, so she had to take a swing shift before she could set her own hours. Her husband was working night shift, so they needed someone to care for my nephew on weekends. I jumped at the opportunity because I loved him and I was good with him. He knew me and was a joy as a baby. I wasn't very popular in college and had few friends, so having something to do on weekends brightened my mood somewhat. I'm trying to keep this short as possible, but let you know the backstory, otherwise the rest of my tale wouldn't make sense. I started keeping my nephew on the following weekend my sister asked, which was a Thursday, and Sunday would be my last day. It was Friday, February of 1990. I just put my nephew to bed and had myself a beer and a cigarette on the back porch. Yes, I was smoking and had one beer. Get over it, it was the 90s. There were no cell phones, computer with internet games or chat boards, so when I say it was quiet, it was very quiet. They lived on Highway 322 outside of Clarksdale, Mississippi, and there were not many homes on that road at this time. Also very little traffic. I was reading a book. About halfway through the chapter I was reading, you could have heard a pin drop. The crickets stopped chirping, the wind literally stopped blowing, the mockingbird I heard calling went silent, and the air suddenly felt so heavy it became difficult to breathe. I got up, opened the door to step outside down the steps, and as I am frantically looking around to figure out what was happening, the transformer next to the house explodes with a boom. Both streetlights go out and I can smell burning rubber and plastic. I jumped so bad I felt my heart catch in my throat, and the sound was deafening with sparks flying everywhere, looking almost like fireworks on the 4th of July. I couldn't hear the monitor to my nephew anymore, and I realised the power had gone out. So I rushed in to make sure he was still sleeping and not freaked out in the pitch black. He was perfectly safe, still sleeping peacefully and totally unaware of my miniature meltdown. Just as I was leaving his room, I heard a noise I still have no explanation for. The sound was a close relation to that of a crying child and a woman screaming. Now believe me when I tell you I am a country girl, lived in the country most of my life, and I know what a panther sounds like. I've heard it many times, but this sound was nothing like that. It even resembled the sound of a dying cat, or any animal that may be close to death. It's an incoherent whimpering, a slight cackle here and there, and then silence. The sound sent a chill right up my spine, making me feel lightheaded and weak. I do not scare easily. I consider myself brave and rational, but all of that departed, leaving me feeling dizzy and nauseous. The sound was not coming from inside the house, but outside, close to the porch, right where I'd been sitting. I knew this because I left the screen door open, and standing there motionless, looking out the door, I knew it was out there, somewhere. I waited a few moments, then reached for my sister's baseball bat she kept next to the door. She's not a fan of guns or knives, neither am I, but that bat brought no comfort knowing I would have to get as close as possible in order to hit it. Trying to find the courage to walk out that door, believing it was only an animal, brought me no solace. I'm tough, and I would do whatever it took to protect my nephew. But as I stepped out onto that porch and heard nothing, I grabbed the flashlight hanging next to the porch door, clicked it on, and looked around. I slowly advanced towards the outside door, opened it, and walked slowly down the steps, my heart pounding. The only sound I hear is the air leaving and entering my lungs. I feel dizzy and start sweating from fear and adrenaline pumping through me like wildfire. Behind my sister's house are nothing but wooded forest and empty fields. Being February, there isn't much going on in the farming community. I make my way to the edge of the field and I hear it again. That dying animal sound, screech, and what I can only describe as tearing flesh or like paper. I have no idea at this point what I'm hearing. I shine the flashlight towards the noise, and what I saw still haunts me to this day. Glowing red eyes, staring right at me, and in that instant I knew it wasn't any kind of animal I'd ever heard, seen, or knew about. Animal eyes do not glow red when you point a light at them. They are either orange or bright yellow, almost white. Just as I am about to take a step back, a rush of wind blows past me and I see wings, Yes, wings. These wings were at least 50 to 60 feet in width, too big for an owl, buzzard, or any other type of bird in that area. When it opened its wings, the rush of wind almost knocked me off my feet. It was moving its wings back and forth. The body of a man, eyes of a demon, and a body enveloped in jet black. I stood there shaking, trying to rationalize what I was seeing, not believing 1 minute of it. My hands began to tremble, and I felt as though I was about to faint. I stood up, and with a quick whoosh, it shot into the air and out of sight. My mind raced. What did I just see? What the hell had just happened? The moon was out that night, so I saw it shoot straight up and disappear, almost with no sound at all. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the area in which I live, but on that night the Parker family was brutally murdered. Not an hour after I had seen whatever that was I had seen, a family of 4 had come home, walked in on 4 burglars, were tied up, raped, and burned alive. Their home was burned to the ground, and the 4 men who committed this heinous act are still living today. The justice system in this area rarely sees true justice. After that night, I started researching possibilities on what I had witnessed, and each time my research led me back to none other than the Mothman. The folklore that surrounds this creature is a sign, an omen of things to come, a tragedy, something so evil you cannot even imagine what it could be. This is the first time I have ever shared this. Trying to remember little details, I'm still convinced what I saw that night was the angel of death, Mothman, Lucifer himself. Who knows? But I know what I saw, and I believe with my whole heart that entity was a prelude to the unimaginable, heinous crime being committed that night. I do not believe it appeared to warn me in particular, but ever since I saw it that night, my research has revealed that more than me have seen this creature. An entire town, villagers, people who have seen this creature right before an accident or traumatic event. Again, I don't necessarily believe in the supernatural, but I do believe in evil, and what I saw that night was of pure evil. I could feel it, smell it, and almost taste it. It exuded evil to the extent I was almost overtaken by it, making me feel so physically ill I could not shake it off. The next morning, when I learned of the murders, which, incidentally, was only about a half-mile from my sister's house, I had that same feeling of dread, nausea, and a burning in my stomach. I had to run to the bathroom to throw up. It made me so violently ill. I'm sure many will tell me what I saw was nothing more than some rare bird, or something that can be logically explained. But I know what my gut tells me, what my heart and my soul, I know what I saw. It was not of this world, and quite frankly, I never want to see it again. I was on a date with a girl, and we decided we wanted to do something more interesting than just get food and talk. While coming up with ideas, she mentioned a haunted road on a nearby island that people visit sometimes. Since it was almost Halloween, I thought it would be fun. However, I was skeptical of ghosts and most things paranormal in general, so I thought nothing would really happen. So the story for this haunted road is that sometime in the 60s, a young man was riding his motorcycle down when it was raining and there was low visibility. The road itself is just a dirt road that connects to 2 sides of the main road that loops around. Supposedly, the man lost control and crashed into a big rock at one end of the road, and that's where he died. So we go to the road, park the car, and go touch the rock like you're supposed to if you want to see the ghost. You then wait outside your car, and you'll see lights coming down the road and hear a motorcycle engine, but it'll disappear before it gets to you. As we were waiting outside the car, I was just standing there thinking to myself that nothing was going to happen, but my date was pretty adamant that we just had to wait. So we stood around for another 10 minutes or so, and still nothing. So I said we should just go since it's cold, and she agreed. I get in the car and start it, and as I look in the rearview mirror, I see a light from down the road. Immediately I was in disbelief and thought it must just be a regular car, so I get out to have a better look. However, there was only one light, so I knew it couldn't be a car. I stared at it for what seemed like forever and heard the sounds of tires on dirt, so I knew it was moving, but once it got close to us, the light disappeared and the sound of the motorcycle was gone. Now, since I was mind blown, I tried to figure out what I could have seen, and I thought it was someone messing with us. So I got in my car and drove around the loop and came back to the haunted road from the other side. But we saw absolutely no one. And it was really late, so I'm not sure why someone would be out there to begin with. This happened almost 2 months ago, and I still have no rational explanation for what I saw that night. Is a ghost in my workplace the spirit of a murder victim? So I work at a small store in my town. The store used to be a house, then a parking lot, and now a small store. It was built by a local family who in this story I will call the Blackwells, just in case one of them come across this post. So there is a ghost in my store. Regularly the cameras go crazy, stuff flies on the shelves, and occasionally you can hear movements in the basement and attic when no one is there. The ghost doesn't seem to be malicious. It usually stops doing creepy stuff when we ask nicely or get visibly frightened. It's gotten to the point where we write down the ghost is on shift when we close down for the night and normally wish it good night and good morning. Something does set this ghost off though and makes it seem angry, and that is whenever the owner of the building, the patriarch of the Blackwell family, comes to the store. You can just feel the anger, and the cameras will go straight up, shut off, and stuff will fly off the shelves more often, as well as sometimes seeing a shadow move around just out of sight. There has always been a rumour that the patriarch of the Blackwells had his fourth wife's lover killed and buried under one of the properties. I think the ghost is this lover, and that's why they get furious whenever the Blackwells enter the building. Tell me what you think, as this really creeps me out, as like I said, the spirit is normally harmless and calm, and he's just sort of there. When I was 19 working unarmed security, I was placed as a flex officer at a retirement home while the regular officer was on vacation. The first 2 shifts were learning the main care hospice building and the apartment and cottage areas for the independent seniors. Usually we only had to check the outer buildings a couple of times a night to make sure no one was wandering around or no wildlife were getting into the trash. But my experiences began in the main building on the second shift after the regular officer had left for his vacation. One of the morbid duties that wasn't an overly often occurrence was escorting a body from the facility with the coroner and usually the family of the resident. On that night, a very elderly woman had passed around 1 a.m. with her daughter and grandsons by her side. Just after 1:45, I greeted the coroner at the service entrance and we took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The ride was unsettling and sombre, both myself and the coroner in absolute silence in the elevator ride that seemed hours too long. My eyes were fixated on the gurney donning a reddish body bag with a funeral home logo. I stood at the room door as the family cried as the nurse and coroner took possession of the woman's now lifeless form. All of us, including the family, walked into the elevator to go to the ground level to see her off in the van. As it pulled away, the grandsons thanked and shook my hand for my assistance, though I felt as if I had done nothing. For the rest of the night it seemed slow yet eerie. I kept thinking about that gurney with the body bag and how life is so uncertain. The following night I was sitting at the welcome desk across from the on-duty nurse who had dozed off. I was reading a book about the history of the occult when I noticed from across the main reception area, where entertainers or youth group came to enlighten the spirits of the residents, the dessert carousel machine with its dim soft white light flickered. It didn't flicker to an electrical default, but instead as if someone was standing in front of it or walked past it. I walked out to see if a resident was maybe looking for a late night treat, but the area was void of anyone but myself. I brushed it off as an oddity, as just my eyes acting up. But as soon as I returned to the desk, the grand piano that sat halfway between the dessert carousel and my desk struck 3 keys. Now I began to get spooked. I decided now was the best time to do a property check. As I was returning down the last resident hall towards the reception area, I heard the music of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. I felt my blood run cold. I staggered towards the reception area, hoping to see a resident or even the nurse, but as soon as I hit the threshold to the reception area, it fell dead silent. I nervously checked to see if it were a player's piano, but found that it required a pianist. As I was still inspecting the piano with my light, the nurse walked over. "Why did you stop playing? It was really nice," she said. I turned with confusion and a little fear. "That wasn't me," I said. The nurse's face went white. "Do you know what time it is?" She extended her wrist to where I saw the time, 1:07 a.m. We both went out to the smoking area, which was absolutely not permitted for resident safety reasons. Shortly after, the nurse refused to be left alone, so I accompanied her while she did her rounds, checking on the residents. While on the 3rd floor, 2 doors down from the recently deceased woman, we heard faint music again. The family was still in the process of removing her items, and one item on her nightstand we found was the source of the soft, haunting music. Sitting there was a small music box, playing a version of Moonlight Sonata. I've posted on here before and have had a few people asking me for more encounters, so here is one that is hands down my favourite encounter. I've lived in a house that is haunted by a past owner for 16 years. I knew that there was something here right away after moving in. I would hear footsteps in my hallway when everybody else was asleep, and sometimes just feel another person's presence when I was supposed to be alone. There's never been any fear, nor have any of my family members felt threatened in any way. When my daughter was around 1, she is now 13, she was sitting in her high chair eating a snack while I was doing some dishes. She was always a high-energy, rambunctious child and would want out of the chair immediately after finishing her food. When this happened, she would kick her legs and make her tray fall to the floor. She had only started doing this, so I was still finding ways to keep her from getting injured, such as falling out. This time my daughter falls forward with the tray. I didn't even have time to react. Before I could even try to run over, I was maybe about 5 feet away. She just stopped in mid-air, halfway to the floor. I blink and she's back in the chair, blowing spit bubbles, all happy. If this had not happened right in front of my eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. This is how I began my research as to exactly who had lived here and what had happened. My resident ghost is a kindly, older gentleman who passed away in the house. He likes to whistle tunes on Sunday mornings and doesn't like it when we are not nice to each other. We call him Gramps because he is loving and protective like a grandpa. He's very much a member of our family. He protects us from the other entities that like to pass through. We live near a large river which is said to hold paranormal energy in and around it. I believe that, since there seem to be many portals in and around my area. I'll give a little background to my story. My dad got custody of my brother and I when I was 7 and he was 4. For a while we lived in a small 2-bedroom home. The rooms were small and just cramped. I hated sharing a room with my brother and him having access to all my stuff. So when my dad told us that our current landlord bought the much bigger 3-bedroom home down the road and was willing to rent it to us, I was thrilled. My dad was a prison guard, and he would later be promoted to a correctional counsellor. He was hard-working and not home between the hours of 6 and 5 p.m. We had babysitters up to the point I was around 12, then none, and we had to get ourselves ready for school and usually feed ourselves dinner. This was never a problem because we knew how to cook and keep house, and we mostly had a good relationship with our dad. I will note he was an annoyingly sceptical man at this point in his life. I remember touring the house for the first time. I barely paid attention to most of it, just fought my brother for the biggest bedroom. I stood in the middle of the room and spun around, marvelling at all the space I was going to have. I had absolutely no reason to be upset. But then, for some reason, I just felt, well, dead inside is the only way I can describe it. I walked out and told my dad I didn't feel right. He told me it was probably because it was hot in the house. I accepted this because I did not want to think any more about it. I wanted to be excited for our new house. We moved a week or so later, and for a while my feelings were good. For some time my room felt warm and cosy. I have fond memories of laying in bed wrapped in my tie-dye comforter, watching TV when I was supposed to be asleep. These good times didn't last long. Life was fine in the house for a few months. At the most, I maybe saw a few movements out of the corner of my eye, but such things as these are easy to dismiss. The one thing that bothered me the most was the basement. It was a cave of concrete slabs, low ceilings, and a dark storage area where we kept our Christmas and Halloween decorations. The main open area held our washer and dryer and a bunch of my dad's driftwood projects he sold to local pet shops for terrariums. The basement always made me feel sick, like a deep pit of dread in my stomach that wouldn't go away until I went back upstairs. Of course, laundry was my job, so I would make many trips down there, but I made them as quick as I could. It started with voices. They were quiet at first, but eventually I would be startled awake by random screams that no one else in the house seemed to hear. Heavy footsteps and banging outside my bedroom door became common. My room was the centre of the house. Off of our computer room, my dad's was on one side, by the kitchen, and my brother was on the other side of the living room. So we weren't exactly close to each other. Soon after this started, however, my brother began sleeping in my dad's room. So something must have been bothering him too. The activity remained constant for a while, with things getting knocked over, noises at night, and general eerie feelings. It didn't escalate until one night when I had some friends over. I believe my dad was playing poker with the neighbours, and my friends and I were drawing and listening to music. Suddenly one of my friends said, "Who's that?" And we all stopped to look where she was pointing. In my dad's large TV, we could see our reflections, sitting around the table. But there was someone else, the vague reflection of a man sitting on the couch behind us. We were so stunned, looking back and forth from the empty couch to the TV screen. My friend stood up, and we all watched in horror as the mysterious figure on the screen turned slowly to look at her. We all screamed and ran outside. I ran down the street to try to get my dad to come home. He insisted we had simply scared ourselves. As time went on, things in the house got worse. I began having episodes of paranoia and insomnia. I'd always been a stubborn kid, but I became depressed and refused to get out of bed. I felt weak and dazed and not present in the room with others. As my mental state deteriorated, the spirits of the house moved closer in. I began to see them. At times a tall, shadowy, slender man-shaped figure would creak my bedroom door open to stare at me. I would hear what sounded like a woman softly crying under my bed. There was a man with burnt face who would hide in the dark corners of the basement, and I would hear his raspy breathing before I saw him. It felt like a nightmarish Dr. Seuss book that my father refused to acknowledge. One day I was walking through my computer room, and it felt like I ran into someone's open hand. And as the fingers began to squeeze around my neck, I ran backwards and just stood, holding my neck in shock. Later I began to cough up small amounts of blood. This concerned my dad, so he took me to the ER. The doctor shined a light down my throat and said I had several tiny lacerations in the back of my esophagus, and asked if I had accidentally ate some metal or glass. I was positive I hadn't. A couple of months after this, I woke up spitting blood again with the same cause. Then it happened to a friend of mine when she spent the night. We still don't have an explanation for these injuries. I feel my breaking point with this house came when I was retrieving laundry from the basement. I was almost up the stairs when I felt a cold hand wrap around my ankle, and I was violently yanked. Screaming, I fell down the concrete stairs. This event ripped a huge patch of skin off the front of my leg, and also left my cheek and elbow bleeding. As I hit the floor, I heard a raspy laugh, mocking and cruel. I ran upstairs sobbing and begged my dad to move, pleading with him to believe me, and he simply insisted I had lost my footing. Determined to prove to him that the house was haunted, I made a pair of dowsing rods. For anyone who doesn't know, dowsing rods are bent metal rods that you hold in your hands that rotate when they come into contact with magnetic energy. They were once used to detect underground water, but are more often used to detect spirits. I made the rods out of a piece of cut-up wire hanger and used straws to separate the metal from the skin of my hands. My dad watched, amused, as I walked around our computer room with the rods. As I approached a wall shelf that held my dad's precious moment figurines, the rods began to aggressively rotate towards me and then back as I stepped away. "Does that mean they're full of water?" my dad laughed. Shortly after he said this, it was as if someone swept their arm along the shelf and threw all the figurines against the wall. My dad's face dropped. I didn't end up feeling nearly as satisfied as I'd hoped. After that, the spirits started stalking my dad too. They knew he knew about them now, no point in hiding, I guess. My dad finally disclosed to me that a shadowy figure stood in the kitchen outside his room at night and watched him. He couldn't sleep at night anymore and almost lost his job. We moved soon after this. As the years went by, I saw many families move in and out of that house. No one stays there for long. I had an opportunity a few years ago to tour the house as it was available for rent. Walking from room to room, it was clear the energy was still present, dark and heavy as ever. I asked the landlord in the most passive way if any of the previous tenants had said anything about paranormal activity. He was surprised by the question and informed me he had just bought the property. We ended up talking for a while and I gave him the best heads up I could. Luckily, he seemed more intrigued than upset. Hope he keeps that enthusiasm. I did not rent the house and have put it and its less than pleasant occupants in the past. One thing I will always be thankful for is the endurance I developed while living there. I am no longer afraid of ghosts. I've been yelled at, intimidated, or hurt by the paranormal. I've seen their worst. So now I am absolutely the person who investigates those sounds at night. I thrive in paranormal locations and seek them out. Most spirits just want acknowledgement and understanding. Some want to pull you down the stairs. Just like people, they aren't all winners. That house helped me to be brave and face my fears. It made my dad a believer too, and it gave us a lot of stories to tell over the years. So I guess I'm grateful I had the experiences, even if it was ultimately unpleasant. It helped to mold me into the person I am today. Thank you for reading this, and just let me know if you want to hear any more stories. I enjoy sharing them with you. I live in an apartment house that is meant for student housing. It's 2 stories with 5 bedrooms, each with their own private bathroom. There's a kitchen and living room downstairs. I live in one of the bedrooms downstairs. Over the past week, I've had 3 separate paranormal experiences that I have no real explanation for, and I'm starting to wonder if maybe I've encountered a poltergeist. The first thing that happened was around 2:30 a.m. when I was home alone and cleaning my bathroom while waiting for my friend to come over. I heard an enormous crash and thought someone had broken in through the glass-paned back door. Instead, what I found was the glass light covering in front of my bedroom door had somehow detached from the fixture and shattered across the ground, leaving glass everywhere. The light bulbs themselves had not been broken. I was left incredibly shaken, thinking about how that could have fallen on someone. After that, my dog refused to walk out of my bedroom, and I had to carry her into her kennel in the next room, where she normally slept at night, by her own choice. The next day, I cleaned the kitchen with my friend, and one of the things we noticed was on the dishwasher, because there was a gross smell coming from it. Later, when we were resting on the couch, the microwave and the dishwasher both turned themselves on at the exact same time. There was nothing on the microwave screen. However, the dishwasher was turned to pots and pans, a setting my household doesn't use. Then yesterday, I left my house to go pick up some necessities from the supermarket with my friend, making sure the door was locked before I left, because there's been a lot of crime in our area. I even go as far as to shake the door before I leave to double check it's actually locked, because the door doesn't always lock correctly. So we can say with 100% certainty that the door was completely closed and locked. When I get back, however, the door is wide open. My friend and I combed the house with our defense weapons, a pepper spray and a prayer, yelling to anyone that might have been inside they need to leave. There was nobody in my house and nothing had been taken, but the experiences I've been having are starting to spook me quite a bit and leaving me on edge. Now I can't sleep because of these new, detailed and graphic nightmares I've been having. They involve shootings and crushed babies and just in general some of the most disturbing dreams I've ever had. All of these things combined have left me nervous and wondering, am I dealing with more than just bad student housing and stress? Any and all advice is greatly appreciated. When I was around the age of 11, I lived with my family in Maddock, North Dakota, a very small town with only 5 streets along the main highway. It had its own school district, but that's because it was so far out in the middle of nowhere, even by North Dakotan standards. I remember my mother having to drive several miles just to get a signal on her phone, and this was back in 2009. I'm 21 now, and the things that happened in that house have haunted me since. The house has since been torn down, but I can still feel it, like the house itself is one giant ghost that still haunts me. It was one of the first to be built in the town, dating back about 130 years. I don't know the history of the house specifically, but somehow it came to be owned by my grandmother on my mother's side. Stepping into the house was like stepping into an icebox. I do have to preface this experience with how I am not new to paranormal phenomena. I grew up in a very spiritual household, and I guess I became a sort of magnet, but nothing prepared me for this. Stepping into this house, you could feel its cold, dead grasp on you. It left you paranoid and sleep-deprived. I stopped being able to sleep in my room alone, so I had to have our large German Shepherd sleep in my bed. Every night there used to be something in the corner of my room staring down at me. Obviously, if I look back on it, this is exactly when my sleep paralysis started. But I liked to tell myself it didn't start until I was a freshman in high school. But I know better. If the power went out, I would freak out. I was afraid whatever monster that was at the end of my bed would come for me in the darkness. This is how the haunting started, with the paranoia and the fear of sleep. Then came the figures we would see at the end of the hall and the things flying off walls or counters. The threat of physical violence started. We would be pushed down the stairs. Sometimes it would be subtle. Sometimes you could feel cold hands on your back as they pushed. But you could always see the shadow at the end of the hall, its faceless shadow towering in the dimly lit hallway. We only lived there for about 6 months. The last thing that happened to us before moving back was during the holiday season. We were all sitting in the living room, me, my mom and my dad, watching TV, when without warning all the pictures flew off the walls. Things we had up on shelves flew from their homes. Glass shattered on the other side of the room from where it belonged. Then about 2 weeks later we moved. Sometimes though, I think part of that house came with us.
That's all we have time for today. On behalf of everybody here at DNA Paranormal Services, we thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed our episode today and that you join us again soon for another installment of Out of the Darkness. Remember to show your support by following our podcast. You can also visit us at daparanormal.com or check us out on social media, Facebook and Instagram. If you have a paranormal encounter you would like to share with our listeners, you can send it to us at storysubmission@daparanormal.com. That's storysubmission@daparanormal.com. As normal, all links and story links will be in the notes section. Again, thank you for listening, and we hope you join us again soon.